As we mentioned before, textures are basically images. Usually, we use textures to make 3D objects look more believable. For example, with the same model, which is this basic cube, we can make it looks like a brick wall by adding a brick texture to it. Or we can make it looks like a wood by adding a wood texture to it. So you can see how important textures are in look development, whether before rendered 3D animation or for 3D game artworks. We can divide texture into two different categories based on how it was generated. First is static or non-procedural textures, which are images in a form of external image files as we all know, such as JPEG file, PNG file, etc., or even video or movie files such as AVI, MOV, and MP4. Different software named them differently, but for now, let's just name this category as image texture. The second type of texture are images generated by program. These images are not exist in a form of image files, but produced dynamically by a set of programming algorithm. We can easily change the look of the image generated by tweaking some parameters. Again, different software may call it with different names, but the concepts are still the same. For our course, we're going to call this type of texture as procedural texture. So again, in our term, image textures are textures exist in a form of image files or video files. They are static in the way that you cannot simply tweak parameters to change its look or behavior. Procedural textures, on the other hand, are dynamically generated images created by a program, and we can control the looks of it on the fly simply by changing some parameters. In reality, CG artists combine these image textures and procedural textures together to create complex texture effects. There are even special software developed specific for this task, such as Substance Designer, which can be used to mix and match both of these texture types and pack them into a single file for convenience. But this will be outside the scope of our course. Now, if you are working in an industry that produces rendered images or animation, such as for architectural visualization or visual effects, then learning procedural texture is essential. But for game assets development, if you are using Blender, you really want to focus on image texture, not procedural texture. Why? Well, because procedural textures are software specific. They cannot be transferred to external software easily like image textures do. This is not Blender-specific problem, but all 3D software are like that. So even if you do want to generate procedural textures for game, then you should do it in a game engine such as Unity, not inside Blender. But still, learning procedural texture in Blender can be useful if we bake them. The term baking in computer graphics means we are rendering the textures, but the results then stored right into the image textures of the 3D objects. If right now, all of these still not make any sense, don't worry, we'll get there eventually, inshallah. In the next lesson, we're going to focus on procedural texture first, then after that we'll cover image texture.